Another 4 more?
Sure.
Okay.
You're the boss. You count the time.
Oh, well, there are so many who would like to hear views. This Mr. Krishnamurthy, IIT Madras, 1983. What is your realistic assessment of a turnaround in the economies in the US, UK and India? And what are the signs to look for in recognizing such a turnaround?
I think in the US, which is probably the economy I know best other than India, we probably are not going to see a substantial bottoming out before the end of next year. Probably third quarter, fourth quarter is when we should see a stabilization, and then the growth only in 2010. If that happens, I think that would be a reasonable forecast, if not even an optimistic one. There are far more pessimistic forecasts around, but I don't think you want to hear that. For India, I think the real issue is first, as the interest rates come down, I think that we should see consumption in the interest rate sensitive sectors pick up once again. Of course, people in housing will worry a little bit. Prices aren't going to go one way. They're going to think about two-way price movements. They're going to be a little more cautious. But I think that we will see a certain resumption in buying of cars, in housing, as interest rates come down. I think as far as investment goes, that may be the greater issue. And that depends on how we get sort of this infrastructure thing going, spending on infrastructure. And I hope that we can get more of it quickly.
Thank you.
But all in all, I think India, in terms of growth numbers, is going to have perhaps a worse time than we expected for India, but a much better time than the rest of the world. Much of the world is looking at zero growth, if not negative growth next year. We, looking certainly at reasonable positive numbers, are in a much better situation.
Mr. Hari Padmanabhan, IIT Kanpur, 75. What's your take on Obama's proposed solution to economic revival, his Keynesian approach creating employment, etc.? Look,
I think politicians around the world are very hesitant to let things lie, and sometimes for good reason. They always want to make things happen quickly and move an economy out of its problems quickly. It is true that consumer demand has collapsed in the US and investment demand is following, and perhaps the government can do a little bit to expand demand. But ramping up government expenditure, apart from giving more transfers to poor households so that they can spend more, is in general quite difficult. They're also talking about infrastructure expenditure, but they have again the same problems in ramping it up that undoubtedly we have. So, and when they're talking about stimulus packages of $1 trillion, that is 10% of GDP. Half the government budget is what they're thinking of spending. It's very hard to spend that effectively and efficiently in such a short time. So I think we'll have a lot of big numbers, but in actual effective expenditure over the next year, it may be more limited. Maybe in 2 years we'll see more, but by that time we're going to be out of, in large measure, things will be taken care of. Ultimately, the problem in this recession is U.S. households are extremely levered, and they have to rebuild their balance sheets. They've borrowed too much, their asset values have fallen, they have to save for some time and have to feel more comfortable with the future. That is what they're doing. And even while they're doing that, everybody wants them to go back on that spending spree, which was the problem in the first place. So I think it would be good to leave them alone for a little while, let the U.S. household build up its savings, do a little bit on the government side, but expect that there's not going to be a huge amount of action, that the real thing is to keep the system from collapsing, the financial system, and help it clean itself out and come back over time.
Thank you very much. This is Mr. Ganesh Shastri. How can India sustain a trade deficit of close to $100 billion a year without the rupee and the economy collapsing?
Well, first, the trade deficit is a little misleading because We don't count trade in software, for example, and business processes and so on, which reduces that deficit. The true Indian current account deficit which has to be supported by foreign inflows, is more like $25 billion, 2.5% of GDP, or in that ballpark, rather than $100 billion, which is 10% of GDP. So India is not that badly off in terms of running a deficit. And to the extent that foreign investors feel confident about India and are willing to put their money in, and I have to say here, actions like what we saw by Satyam a couple of days ago don't help in this regard. But to the extent that they feel confident, there's no reason to believe that the rupee will not be sustained at a reasonable exchange rate going forward. Our current account deficit is not too big, and foreign investors who are, do think that Indian growth rates are quite attractive will stay in.
Last question. What do you see as the global currency of the future? The US dollar, the pound sterling, the euro, the Chinese yuan, or gold?
What about the Indian rupee? Actually, that wasn't completely facetious. I think some mix of these large currencies, certainly in the next 20 years, India will become one of the 3 or 4 big economies in the world. And if we manage to create the financial sector reforms that are badly needed, I chaired a committee which proposed a bunch of them, but if we can do some of that, I have no reason to doubt that the Indian currency will be one of the big currencies used in the world. My sense is currencies over time will just reflect economic weight. And so we will have a mix of reserve currencies being used, and both the renminbi and the Indian rupee will be part of a global currency basket.
Thank you very much, Professor Raghuram Rajan. I now request Anand to distribute a couple of mementos and then propose a vote of thanks.
Thank you, Raghu. I now see why you got all those impressive awards and all those accolades that I read out in the resume. I think this was a great exposition on the macroeconomic situation in the world today, challenges facing India, challenges facing the US. I really do apologize for all the questions that you had written down on these question sheets, which we did not have time for. What I'll try to do is I'll try to summarize them, mail them over to Raghu, and if he has the time and he responds, I'll put it up on the PanIIT 2008 website. Thank you very much. Thanks again, Raghu, for making time for this.
With this,